Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. I have another stenciling video for you. The focus will be on stencils that have coordinating stamp sets. I'll be working with Pinkfresh Studio's Floral Notes and Floral Focus. All of this pretty soft stenciling is going to stand out with some beautiful gold embossing. For my first card, I'm working with a red rubber stamp called Floral Focus. The insert has been removed from my MISTI and I'm stamping with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink on Bristol Smooth cardstock, taking a lot of pressure off of my hands by using a stamping tool that glides over the top of the MISTI, applying even pressure across the panel. Recently ran out of stamp cleaner and I have my eyeglass cleaner fluid sitting close by, so I decided to try it out on my stamp, and I have to say it works well. It's quite economical, and so I'm going to be testing it out on different kinds of inks. The image will be embossed after it's stenciled, so I don't disturb it in my MISTI, I just leave that stamp alone. There are a set of 5 stencils that coordinate with this stamp. 3 of the stencils are for the flowers, and then the last 2 are for the greenery. These stencils have the order in which they're to be used etched on them. I've rewritten them in permanent marker so it's easier for me to see. They also have little corner references on them to line up your panel. My panel is oversized, so I can trim it down later, so I'm not going to be using the references. I'm lining the stencil up with the image. I'm going to be working on Waffle Flower Stencil Mat, which has a couple of features that really help with stenciling. The raised edges on 2 sides and also the non-slip material that it's made out of really helps to keep things in place. I'm going to be working with Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks. These inks are organized in color families. There are 3 per family, a light, medium, and dark tone. This makes color selection very easy. For the first stencil, I'm going to be using the lightest tone called Lemonade. All right, on to stencil 2, and I line it up with the image. The mid-tone, Sunbeam, will be applied to this stencil. It will give some detail to the larger flowers and also color in some of those secondary flowers. When I'm working within one color family, I just give my blender brush a little bit of a clean by rubbing it on paper towel before going on to the next color. Stencil 3 is the first stencil to start adding some color to the greenery. I'm going to be working with my favorite color family of greens. I'll start off with the lightest tone, which is called Aspen. When I apply the inks with a blending brush, I use little circular motions. I'm not trying to achieve an even tone. I lighten up my pressure at times to create a little bit of variation in the coloring. Stencil 4 puts in the final details for the flowers, and I'll be adding in the darkest tone of the yellow family called Citron. Stencil 5 adds in the final details for the greenery, and I'll be adding in the mid-tone green called Sage. And in no time at all, the coloring is complete. Is there ever too much of a good thing? I absolutely love the Copic 100 black marker, and I can't believe how long it took me to discover it. The background is solid black with no marker lines at all, and I love how it makes everything pop. Bet you thought I was going to trim down my panel. Well, I just about did, and I caught myself. So once I've got it oriented correctly, back into the MISTI it goes, and I'm going to stamp it with Versamark ink. I haven't worked a lot with Simon's new ink, so I'm just testing to make sure that everything's dry and the powder's not going to stick. After my panel is coated with anti-static powder, I'm ready to stamp it. The stamping tool is used to apply pressure. I'm going to apply gold embossing powder to this panel. Heat does cause the panel to warp. To help minimize that, I apply heat to both the front and the back. I want my lines to be very smooth and slightly puffy, so I'm going to be embossing the image twice. An A2 size card base is going to be matted with black cardstock that is size 4 1/8 of an inch by 5 3/8. My main panel was trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I give it a dusting with the microfiber cloth to pick up any remnants of that anti-static powder, and then onto the card base it goes. The sentiment for this card is from Pinkfresh Studio's You Are Amazing stamp set. The black cardstock has been coated with anti-static powder, and I stamp the sentiment with Versamark ink and apply the gold embossing powder. After the powder is melted, the sentiment is trimmed down with my Tim Holtz guillotine. I really like this cutter. When you have to make close cuts, the press plate holds that paper firmly in place. After it's trimmed down, it's mounted on black sheet foam. Just a reminder, if you see anything that I'm using that grabs your attention, links can be found in the description of this YouTube video or on my blog at bonniecarolee.com. After the sentiment is attached, the card is embellished with some gold confetti by Studio Cassia called Gold Fever. In the background, there are a couple of branches with some berry detail. I'm going to top off those little berries with some dandelion yellow Nouveau Crystal drops. And of course, if there's confetti or sequins on a card, I have to top it up with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew. The flower centers are finished off with prills. Ones that I'm using are gold and they're called Gilt Trip, G-I-L-T. So cute. I'm always amazed at what I can find in my craft room. I think I buy stuff and put it away and then I forget that I have it. I love the texture that this adds to the flowers. I put a good amount of glue in the center of the flower, and then I use my Tonic Studio spoon to scoop up the prills and set them in place. And as one might expect, I have prills everywhere, and I really should have been thinking and put down some protective paper first before I started working with these little things. So I'll just set my card aside, let it dry completely before I shake off the card, and then I'll get busy with my hand vac. Of course, you know what I mean. I'm going to shake my card off in my garbage can, and then the hand vac will take care of my work surface. And on to card 2 with this absolutely gorgeous image from Floral Notes. One of the hinges broke on my regular size Misty, so I had to dig out my big one for this stamp. This is an older stamp set, and I found that I did have to play around with the stencils to get them lined up. The stencil is lined up for the flowers that are at the top of the panel, but I found that when I moved on to the flowers in the lower portion, I did have to readjust the stencil. I start off by putting on a very light coat of Cheeky, and then going to use the mid-tone from this color family, Blush, and apply it to the center of the flower with a bit more pressure. And as you can see, I'm having to make some minor adjustments to the stencil as I go. Not that it's a big deal, it's just good to know. Ink will be applied the very same way to the small flowers. So I'm going to start off with a color called Peachy, and then go into the center with a little bit of a darker tone called Grapefruit. And as you can see, I've switched over to a small blender brush by Simon Says Stamp that actually just came in the mail. So how's that for perfect timing? So now I have switched over to the second stencil, and there are openings for the tiny little flowers and the flower centers. So I'm starting off with the flower centers, working with a color called Lemonade. I've switched over to the small blender brush to work on these tiny flowers. I'm going to be applying Sunbeam, which is the mid-tone in this yellow color family that I'm working with. Right at the bottom of this floral image, there's a spray, and I'm going to apply my darkest yellow, which is called Citron. Now on to the third and final stencil, and this will take care of the coloring of all of the greenery. Because I am finding that I have to make adjustments with this stencil as well, I'm going to work at one group of leaves at a time. So first I'm going in with my light tone, which is the celery, and then I'm going to use my smaller blender brush to apply the darker tone, which is perfection, at the base of each of the leaves. After the dark tone has been applied, I do go back with my light tone again and just make sure that I have a nice blend. And honestly, even though I'm having to make some little adjustments to the stencil, it does not slow down the process at all. Coloring with stencils is fast and has a nice result. The one thing that I did find that I had to pay attention to is there are these little stem cutouts, and so you really have to look carefully so that you don't miss them, or at least I do. And when the last stencil comes off, it's almost like a reveal. It's like, oh my goodness, that is so pretty. Like the first card, there's a lot of embossing on this image. I am going to emboss it 2 times, and the lines will be nice and smooth and a little bit puffy. I used the second largest die in Pinkfresh Studio slim stitched rectangles to die cut this panel. I wanted a clean corner on the bottom left hand of this spray so that when I put it on the card base, it would be anchored properly. I didn't want this fussy cut image to look like it was floating in space. The same die that was used to cut the spray before I started fussy cutting it was used to also cut matte gold cardstock. Pinkfresh's slim, fancy diagonal stripes die was used to cut white cardstock. Because this panel was going to be adhered to foiled cardstock, I dotted it with Tombow glue and left it to dry until it was tacky. When Tombow is in its tacky state, it is also repositionable. That made it easy to attach this die cut to the cardstock without the worry of glue smearing. There are several sentiments included in the Floral Notes stamp set. I chose Happy Birthday because it seems I always need a birthday card. After prepping the cardstock with anti-static powder, this stamp was inked with Versamark and embossed in gold. I kept eyeing up the shape of the sentiment stamp and I liked it, so I decided that I was going to use it to trace around my embossed sentiment. After it was fussy cut, I adhered it to black sheet foam. I let it dry before I would trim off the excess, and in the meantime, I'm going to start putting my card together. The diagonal stripe panel is being adhered to a black card base that measures 8 3/4 inches by 3 3/4 inches. The floral panel had also been mounted on white sheet foam and trimmed out. The bottom left-hand corner of the spray is matched up to the corner of the diagonal striped panel. When I trim anything that has been foam mounted that has an irregular shape like this sentiment and also the floral spray, I have my scissors at an angle and I undercut it. There's no concerns about the foam showing, and the cutting doesn't have to be so precise so it's not time consuming. After the sentiment is adhered, some soft pink confetti embellishes this card. Of course, they are finished off with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew. And that wraps up this pair of cards featuring Pinkfresh Studio's Floral Notes and Floral Focus. I just love how pretty those stenciled images look. For me, the addition of the gold embossing just takes it to the next level. If you love stenciling like I do, I have one more video planned that focuses on stenciled accents. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.